Yeah.
Hey, what's your song? You know? It is catered again?
It's in the next room over here. Yeah, I don't know what it is.
There's a born person.
Looks like a lot happening right there.
Yeah, ours this year, you know.
I want to look at his closet.
They keep saying that now, but they
That'll be cut out. She did tell me last night that she got some complaints.
Are you using the mic? You can have presenters use the mic too if they can't hear. Just can you just turn the whole thing toward me a little? Or hey, why don't I just move the owl? Why don't I just move the owl?
Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Wichita. I hope you all had a good day. I think some of us dodged some rain showers, but all in all, the last 2 days have been much better than I expected weather-wise. So we're grateful for that. So welcome to the 2021 Hard Winter Wheat Tour. My name is Aaron Harries. I'm on the staff of Kansas Wheat out of Manhattan, Kansas. Glad to see you all here again this evening. The program tonight is we're going to do our traditional car reports. We're going to go through the different routes of the tour today, have drivers come up front and tell us what they saw on the route today. We'll hear some comments from our experts. We're going to have a report from Oklahoma Wheat on their crop. We're going to talk about tomorrow, those details out of the way, release the numbers for today, and then we'll adjourn for dinner, which is going to be next door. If you have not yet placed your bet with Dave Green, remember again the business card with your name on a piece of paper, and we want you to guess the total bushel production for the state of Kansas. If you are leaving tonight, if you are not coming to Manhattan tomorrow, please give that to Dave tonight before you leave, along with your $1 bill. And remember, that's what we're using to calculate the final number that the tour will release. So it's important that you get that today before you leave tonight. I think we'll start with our traditional introductions. So we'll go back and forth across the room. Please tell us your name, the company you're from, and your location, what town you're from. So let's start in the back row, go across. Fraser, you want to start?
Yeah. Fraser Deacon with 4 Beyond Ingredients, and I'm out of Woodland Park.
My name is Dave Papa from Innovating from Saginaw, Texas.
Faith Lamb, Arden Mills, Overland Park, Kansas.
Rich Kendrick, Great Plains Analytical Lab, Kansas City.
Rita Ott, General Mills, Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Dave Green, Wheat Quality Council, Kansas City.
John Jacobson, RFD TV and Sirius XM Channel 147.
Tom Leffler, Botany, Augusta, Kansas.
Brent Schaffner, Healthy Food Ingredients, Watertown, South Dakota.
Colin Pierce, Healthy Food Ingredients, Watertown, South Dakota. Gary Miller Chasky, Kansas Wheat Commissioner and farmer in Lake, Kansas, Southwest.
There are Andy Eitzen of Marion, Wichita. They're Marion County of Harmon.
Sean Callahan, Carville, Overland Park.
Andrew Blueball, American Crop Science, Central Plains. Mike McGraw, Beef Corporation, Kansas City.
Carl, Tucker County Farmer. Hilton Lawrence, Wilson, from County Farmer.
Josh Lockton, Miller Milling, Minneapolis.
Tim Ashbrenner, Grain Craft, Wichita.
Max Reaming, Grain Craft, Kansas City, Kansas.
Levi Hall, Horizon Resources out of Williston, North Dakota.
Amy Heesh, CHS Hedging, St. Paul, Minnesota.
Clay Patton, KRBN, and the Rural Radio Network based out of Lexington, Nebraska.
Ann Osborne with the National Wheat Foundation. I run the National Wheat Yield Contest.
Max Slater with the Fruit Foundation out of Columbus, Ohio.
Martin Christian, egg producer, South Central Kansas, just 20 miles west.
Wayne Bonder, Anderson's Trader out of Kansas City.
Mark Nelson, Kansas Farm Bureau.
Matt Wiley, I'm the crops editor with the Progressive Farmer magazine and APM.
Chris Kirby, Oklahoma Wheat Commission, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
Randy Fitzwater, farmer, Stafford, Kansas. David Chanamak, advisor for Senator Roger Marshall, Sharon Springs, Kansas.
My name is Bernie Kramer, with Kansas State University and the Kansas Ag Conservancy.
Luana Simone, I'm a PhD student at K-State and a doctoral Latin advisor.
Bernie Benton, Kansas State University, Manhattan, Ag Dean.
Taylor Williamson, Kansas Wheat out of Manhattan.
Ryan Walker, Miller Milling, Minneapolis.
Julie Wissenau, Reporter Warriors out of Chicago.
Kim Sherman, Bloomberg News reporter out of Chicago.
Romo Balabo Extension Wheat Report Specialist with K-State out of Manhattan.
Mike Schulte, Director of the Oklahoma Wheat Commission, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
Marcia Boswell, Kansas City, Manhattan, Kansas.
We get everybody? Okay, thanks especially to our guests for joining us tonight, and we hope some of you chime in when we have comment period later on. Day two is usually pretty variable across the state, and I'm sure everyone saw a few different things. Let's play a quick game of what did you see today? How many of you saw rust? Raise your hands. Okay, pretty prevalent. Not too many severe fields so far. How many of you saw wheat streak today? Okay. How many of you would say that you saw a field of wheat streak that was a complete loss? Yes. We'll talk about more about wheat streak, I think. How many of you saw cracks in the ground? Yeah. There are dry spots in the state, not too far away from here. Anybody see a pheasant?
Yeah. You did it.
Anybody almost hit a deer in the fog? That's me. Okay, well, we've got a lot to talk about certainly as we go through, but there was a lot of variability in what we saw today. But first, I think we'll turn over to Mike Schulte with Oklahoma Wheat to make the trip up here this evening to talk about the crop conditions and the report from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Aaron. Good evening, everyone. It's good to be here in person and be on the Wheat Quality Council. One of the highlights of what I look forward to every year. It's been a long time since I've actually been able to go on the tour, but I always enjoy addressing this group. And so I do have some slides that I gave to Marcia that are going to be going on live stream, but unfortunately I think we're having projector problems. So I'll just kind of talk through my report. On May 4th, Oklahoma broke their crop districts out into 9 different regions. If you start in the Panhandle far western region, generally we have about a 15-inch average of rainfall here, and if you get into the eastern southeast part, our rainfall average is about 55 inches a year. So vastly different regions, and so just overall planting for this year, we actually had adequate moisture in most regions except the far western regions of the Panhandle. With the price outlook being somewhat optimistic, we're not seeing as much wheat that's being laid down for hay. We do have grazing grain producers that actually do run their cattle and sometimes graze wheat out. So we traditionally have not seen as many cattle in the northwest and central regions of the state where the wheat has looked better this year. Although we have been seeing a lot of graze out still in western and southwestern regions. And then it is important to note that we had significant drought during the month of March in all regions of the state. So even though we had really good seeding conditions and we had a wet winter and we had lots of snowfall, the crop really stressed in the months of March all across the state. The far western regions, so the Texas Panhandle from the central portion of Texas County into Cimarron County, a lot of the crop really probably is a complete loss. We've had an inch of rain since March 22nd or March 23rd in those areas, but in many instances, it's just a little too late out in those areas. We have had some disease issues across the state, some barley yellow showing up. Early on, we had a lot of tan spot and septoria in southwest Oklahoma. But producers, when they started seeing that come along, they really made the decisions to put foliar fungicide down. And so I really think as far as if they were planning on taking the crop out, they've really made those management decisions to be there with it. We are starting to see now some, we have seen some leaf rust appear, as well as stripe rust moving on from this point forward. We did have significant freeze damage in portions of central Oklahoma after our September 21 freeze, after our March 21st freeze, where we were over 10 hours of 24 degrees in lower lying regions of the central portion of the state and Canadian County. Overall, though, we're probably looking at about 5 to 10% freeze damage across the state. Although in that area of central Oklahoma, where we did have freeze damage, there were some areas that actually had 90 to 95% damage. We do have thick stands in northwest and central Oklahoma. As you get into southwest and western Oklahoma due to the drought, we certainly have thinner stands. So overall, I think that with the good start to seeding conditions, minimal indication of disease pressure, and harvest conditions likely to be slowed down due to cooler temperatures, I think even though we've had the thinner stands, we certainly think on those stands we're going to have really good grain field. So Grain and Feed came up with the estimates on May 4th of 108 million bushels for the state. They're figuring that 2.7 million acres are going to be harvested at on May 4th, Oklahoma Grain and Feed estimate came up with 110 million bushels for the state, and yield estimate was 37 bushels per acre, and they are estimating 2.9 million acres are going to be harvested. And I think we're probably right in line with that. USDA came out with estimates of 2.7 million acres being harvested at a 40 acre average, or 40 bushel acre average, coming in at 108 this week. I think we're more in line with the Grain and Feed estimates of slightly lower yield, but more acres being harvested. That 110 million bushel average is right in line with the 10-year average. The 5-year average of Oklahoma right now is 98 million bushels, so we are slightly above the 5-year average of what we're going to see. And so with that, I think, things look relatively well for everything that the crop has gone through this year. And so it's really now up to Mother Nature to depend upon whether we're going to, what we're actually really going to see. But I'm hopeful that we're going to have a little bit above average crop. So with that, I'll be glad to take any questions, or I'll be around later if anybody wants to ask me any questions.
So when do you think harvest will start?
We are right now, I would say about a week to a week and a half later. So traditionally where we've been starting the last week of May in southwest Oklahoma, I think it's going to be closer to June 2nd or June 3rd.
So Mike, you mentioned some areas up to 90% freeze damage. So our growers already kind of talk about abandonment on those areas. What's the plan there? Is it a large area?
It's not a real large area. I would say probably maybe 35 or 40,000 acres. It's really just in a river valley bottom of really good land in the central regions of Canadian County.
Mike, any idea how you raised out acres compared to previous years?
We are right in line. So with where we've been, I think we're actually predicting to harvest about 1% more planted acres than what we had last year. So we're right in line with that. But we have seen a loss in acres to cotton production in southwest Oklahoma, as well as soybean production in northern Oklahoma. So where we have 4.3 million acres planted this year as of the January 2021 report, 5 or 6 years ago, we had anywhere from like 5.1 to 5.5 million acres planted. So that's why we're also seeing the lower numbers in the actual estimated harvest.
Any other questions for Mike? Okay, thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Ronald, can I ask you to come up?
Yes.
And Marty, maybe you can act as backup on some of these questions we can answer on this, but Ron will maybe give your perspective on what you saw today across the state, and maybe we can dig a little bit more into Wheat Street and what you think you saw out there.
Yeah, of course. So today we did the black route, right? And so we were kind of like in this middle part of the state. We didn't go as far west as a few of the other routes that were ordering in Colorado. Really, the biggest difference that we saw, and for those of you who were perhaps not there yesterday, right? But the biggest difference that we saw between what the first day and the second day is that, remember that first day up north, we were seeing a lot of like within field variability, right? Within field, a lot of different growth stages within the same field because of that planting date moisture. Pretty much as we got to more of this south central, even parts of southwest, the south central part here, we didn't see as much of that. It seemed like there was a little bit more uniformity in terms of when that crop's coming out, when it was emerging, and so there was more uniformity on those fields. A couple of things that might be going on. So first, remember, well, if you guys remember one of those maps that we discussed in the very first day, there was more rainfall in the southern fringe here in October, right? So that probably really helped with that emergence, more even emergence. And also today we were in a southern route as compared to the day before, and so there's more heat units, more temperature that helps the crop perhaps compensate the filler a little bit more. So maybe those things we're seeing a little bit more uniformity in terms of when the crop emerged in terms of within field variability. Now we saw, I mean, every single field that we stepped into, we were almost getting stuck there, somewhat as much water as we had. But it was very clear that in like Lane County and west from there, the crop had been very drought stressed up to this point. So very thin stands, you know, the heads were very small as well, very thin. Now the moisture is there for that crop to fill up, but a lot of those lower tillers are gone, lower leaves are gone as well. So really it has a small machinery to produce the sugars now and to translocate nitrogen to that grain. So the water's there, but I think we have like a limited canopy by that early drought in the southwest part of the state. Now, Gary brought some example here of something very interesting that I hadn't come across yet. So essentially, what we're looking at here, you can see that the wheat head's almost like a 90-degree angle. And what he was reporting there is that this field was pretty much almost gone. I mean, it was so dry that the plants were kind of starting to kind of wanting to wilt already, right? There's something in plant science, there, crop science, are called wilting point, which is if the plants get to that stage, there's no coming back, right? It's pretty much gone. So it seems like the plants were like almost wanting to get to that stage, and kind of, I mean, after this rain, it's firm, but it's kind of on that 90 degrees. So he was reporting, and this was from south of, well, north of Syracuse.
Yeah, Syracuse, south of Tribune.
South of Tribune, okay, yeah. So that was very interesting. I mean, I hadn't seen these before, but it really tells like what Lucas Hag was saying yesterday, that, I mean, the crop was pretty much saved by the rain in many instances. So that's kind of like probably what we're looking at in a field in these conditions. We didn't see anything like this bad in the black route, but definitely we're seeing a lot of those fields that were very thin, very small heads, and just with like perhaps the flag, the last leaf and the last leaf minus one that were still green, kind of in the bottom were essentially gone there. A couple of other comments that I had here as well was in these routes, especially in the south central, we were getting to some fields and we could tell that they were sprayed, but some of the damage was kind of already done, right? I mean, we could tell that in terms of stripe rust. I agree that we didn't get into anything like Marty, like you tweeted the other day, that was just exploding on stripe rust, but we got in several fields that we could tell that the damage, some level of damage was done before they sprayed, they got to spraying the fields, simply because a lot of the leaf area was already gone, but we couldn't find any spores that seemed to be healthy and thriving, and we could see tracks in the field. So a little bit perhaps on the late side on spraying. Yes,
well, we talked to a producer north central, right below the south central of Kansas. Okay. And what he was saying was it was drought and they didn't think that they were going to get the rest because they were so dry, and literally it exploded. They had just got a little bit of moisture and that cool weather, and it went like crazy in the fields.
Yeah, that's a good comment. And this year it seemed like it was a little bit like we were seeing hot spots of the striped rust showing up. Not necessarily like sometimes we usually see like the entire region kind of get when it is a year like 2016, there was an epidemic of striped rust. We see like the entire region was very consistent. This year it seems like it's a little bit more spotty where we're seeing, perhaps because of that. It was dry, it was kind of keeping it in check. I think we've also had a lot of ups and downs in terms of temperature this year. We've had a few very cold spells, followed by a little bit warmer weather as well. So maybe the conditions were just not there for that type of epidemic. But I think, Marty, I mean, the weather right now is pretty conducive. So
Yeah, very much. What may have happened was, while it was quite dry, then we had a foggy day or two, then we had had some heavy dews, and that was enough to get the infection going, because the spores were moving. So.
yeah, and then the challenge now is that for the majority of the state, I think we've done probably 30 fields between yesterday and today. Maybe 2 or 3 are still within the application window, right? And so the decision, it needs to be taken right away on those fields, and the majority of the fields are past that application window for many of the fungicides because they have a pre-harvest interval in their label that the growers shouldn't go after that.
Well, they immediately went and sprayed, and it is all in check, but you can still see the drought, the rolling flag leaves, and that dark greenish blue color. It's still,
Okay.
but it's still getting that rust too. It's gone now.
What kind of loss did you see then because of the rust and the yield loss?
It's hard to tell in terms of yield loss, in terms of leaf area loss. I mean, we were seeing some of the fields that were looking that they probably lost 20–30% of the top leaf area. Now, how much that's going to turn into grain yield is kind of hard to tell. I'll think that we're going to see a yield decrease due to that leaf area loss, but it's going to be very field specific.
One thing I wanted to mention about where they've come in and done rescue sprays on the right rust. Once that epidermis is broken and we're going to wind up killing the infected cells, you're going to wind up with big necrotic stripes. You're going to substantially reduce leaf area and you'll lose yield. And it's up on the flag leaf, it's problematic. Who knows what that's going to translate to? Because there's a lot of other factors. But it's going to be probably worse than just a loss of your seed weed, which is from the stripe rust.
Yeah, and you know, within our own research program, we were measuring many times that we have fungicide, we're measuring the green leaf area. And if you plot the green leaf area and grain yield in the end, they're pretty correlated. And so, yeah, the loss of leaf area is usually going to reflect the loss of yield too. Aaron, in terms of weed streak mosaic, you asked it as well, right? In our car, in our route, at least, the worst case that we saw was in Lane County. They were not something that I would say was completely gone, but the field was kind of pretty bright yellow, and we're going both sides of the road. Quite a bit of weed streak mosaic there, definitely hurting yields, but nothing similar to what we saw, for example, in 2017, that we were driving in both sides of the road, 40, 50 miles, and the crop was bright yellow and wood high. So nothing, we didn't see nothing that was similar to that this year, but did you see?
So one field, we drove by it and said, you know, no point in checking that.
Yeah, but I'm very curious to hear about the car from the routes and see where it is worse. Because in we've seen a couple of fields, but there was nothing that was just dramatic. So
I would probably be mocked for asking this question, but at one point we get concerned about it being too wet in some of these fields. A lot of standing water in a lot of places.
yeah, we kind of have a saying that wheat doesn't like wet feet, right? It's like a general understanding there. And what that really tells us is that if the crop can't really handle anaerobic conditions for very long. Usually, if I have these numbers right, we had some issues with waterlogging back in 2017 in the central part of the state, in 2016 as well in the central part of the state, that we were seeing large parts of the field kind of just turning white prematurely, just dying prematurely from waterlogging. So yeah, I'll say that if we're more than like probably 24 to 48 hours with standing water conditions, that can start causing some good losses as well. Hopefully they go in those cracks, right? And they don't keep standing on the field for too long.
Yeah, you would go recharge the aquifer. Questions for Romulo? we can ask some more questions too after we have the driver's reports. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's jump into the routes. So if drivers wouldn't mind coming forward when I call in the color and just standing in front of the map there. Is that okay, Marcia? You want in front of the map there? So let's start with yellow today. Yellow route drivers, would you please come up front and give your reports?
So did you come into Oklahoma, Aaron?
What?
Did you come into Oklahoma?
No, they turned me away.
At the gate to the Panhandle.
I think that's it. Okay, again, yeah, Matt Wiley from the Progressive Farmer Magazine. I was on the yellow route with Chris and Wade and Ann Osborne, and Chris was our driver, Chris Kirby. So our average, we got down in southern Oklahoma, so our average calculated yield was 55.3. We had 10 stops today. Lowest yield was 23, highest 89. Last year's the yield last year was 50.2, and estimated around 20 days to harvest. So overall, we saw some pretty good wheat, but we did see some variable development as well. Some disease issues that we noticed with stripe rust and
A little bit of wheat streak mosaic.
a little bit, yeah.
Nothing major.
A little bit of leaf rust too, some freeze damage. Again, nothing that was catastrophic throughout the fields by any means, but we did notice that. We did stop at Keith Kissling's farm in Burlington, Oklahoma, and he was kind enough to show us his one of his content, what he hopes to be is a contest field. He I don't have my notes here with me right now, but he applied a couple rounds of nitrogen on it, did a more of a rescue fungicide at the end when the stripe rust blew up on him a little bit. And I think it was around 50 bushels an acre in that field.
And that was a field that had been grazed.
And exactly. And that's a field that he had yearling steer. He had 2,700 acres of hard winter wheat, and all of it's been grazed through March 1st.
Yeah, he had one all winter.
All winter, yeah. Yeah, and he thinks that might have hurt his yield by about 10 bushel or so because of stopping down on the plants or pulling out the plants or getting some tillers and so forth. But he said some years it doesn't hurt at all with grazing, and it really has worked well for his farm. I guess lunch in the gate. The gate
to the Panhandle.
Yeah.
Oklahoma.
And Lori's Cafe, very good. The special's excellent. Nice Wheatwood Cafe, it's awesome. And I guess the excitement of the tour is we ended up stopping at a field in probably it was just around this area here. We just got that into Oklahoma.
It was between Turpin and Oregon.
Yeah, by Turpin and there was this pivot, and we stopped in and we measured two sides of the field, and I was in the one, and it looked like some of the wheat was a little higher but thin, headed out, but under where the circle was, it was very short, like 11 inches, but the tiller, it was still green, the tillers were, or the head was in the jointing stage, and we recorded that, put it on Twitter, and apparently Big Russ, the owner, or whoever did it, saw it and did not like that. We called us trespassers. And and basically said, hey, that field was, if you would have asked, which we don't know, that field was apparently a cover crop field, and they planted in July or January and terminated on Monday, but there's no sign of termination at that time because it was still very green. And then people were commenting on, saying, well, how can we trust the two words?
And mind you, there was no trespassing signs, and there was no signs of Big Russ around there, so.
Yeah, no fences, no nothing. So. But
Matt,
wanted to
did
do
you
it.
say your 10 stops were spaced across the route, or were they concentrated in Oklahoma?
Throughout the route, I mean, we stopped, took a few in Kansas as we went down toward, and then several throughout this section.
But instead of at Burlington, we went up to, up north, we called Anthony, instead of going across the river, or looking to see this one. We ran out of time, we just ran out of time. So we didn't really get counts in Suffolk County in that area. We were.
I was also on the yellow route this morning and took a detour at Sublette and took the blue route into town. I would just say on the yellow route from north of Scott City down to Sublette was probably the best weed I've ever seen along that route on the history of the school. Just pristine and beautiful weed. A lot of it sitting in water, so which Kansas is never lacking irony. But then we shifted east and beautiful wheat, probably all the way about to Ashland, and then it's just a beautiful drive from there to Coldwater. But when you get to Harper County, Sedgwick County, and Sumner County, everything was clearly affected by drought not too long ago. The bottom half of the plant is dead, and then it got rain, and it shot out a green stem and a couple of green leaves and a head. We saw exactly what Chris was talking about. Rust had exploded, they had sprayed it, they did it too late. So it was probably just like that. They thought the weed was dead, it rained, the rust came in, and then they didn't have a chance. And it was pretty bad shape. Our average on we did 10 stops, our average was 52.6, our high was 94.1, and our low was 13.2. If I had to eyeball it, I would say the estimates from the formula today were a little bit too high compared to yesterday. Yeah, yesterday I think they were spot on. Today I think they were a little bit too high. And the formula doesn't take into account wheat streak and all that other kind of thing. So, okay, blue drivers.
All right. So we were on the blue route. We drove south for what seemed like 2 hours before we hopped out and started checking fields, kind of down to Johnson City. Our average yield, and so we rode together. I did my numbers separate. So our numbers are slightly different, but my average calculated yield was 45.5. And we took 12 stops. The lowest I saw was 26. The highest was 73. And last year's yield for that area was 46.9. Other findings that we saw a lot of weeds growing up, probably just due to fresh rainfall. But they were all about the same height as the wheat. Looked like mustard type weed. I'm not a plant person. Less virus than we saw on the previous day. A little bit of hail damage and some signs of just low moisture. A lot of really short stuff that looked like it just didn't get a chance to go. We also got to check out the Dalton Gang Hangout. Hey. Quite a tourist track.
Did you see the two-headed calf?
We did see the two-headed calf.
My name is Harry, and we did the blue route. I rode with Brian Walker, Rich Kendrick, and myself. So our average was 47.32. We did 11 stops. The lowest yield we got was 21.9. The highest was 71.5. And then last year, I think it was 46.9. That was estimated. So what we found was they were like on the southwest, we had a different average. I was like 36.3, that's what we got. And then on the east side, it was better. That was 15.96. That was in the Barber County, I think. That had the highest yield too. Like he did, we also went to we hung out at the gang's hideout. And then there was a medicine lodge we're trying to barge in, tried all the combinations, we could not get in there. So that, yeah, so we could not do, and then, the other interesting thing was, yeah, we probably drove through the fog for 2 hours. So nothing. It was a fun trip.
So you said you had a separate estimate for Southwest Kansas, so you're talking about this part of the route here.
Yeah.
And that was,
This one had a lower, 36.6, and this side was 50.96.
thanks, guys.
And one other note was in those southwesternmost counties down there, we think that it was probably mid-20s eyeball. I mean, our calculations came out probably 10 bushel higher.
Red route.
Hello, Josh from Miller Milling. So I rode with Gary today, and then Ken from Bloomberg, and Josh from RJ O'Brien. So we did the red route, and we did a couple stops in these western counties over here, and then about one every county going this way. So our average yield today was 48.2. We made 13 stops. We had a high of 75.9 and a low of 39.3. Sorry, 31.8, and our average eyeball yield was 39.3. We did have to use the early season formula 3 times today. We saw one wheat field that was being grazed by Syracuse. We also saw some drought stress, some rust, some weed streak mosaic, and also some nutrient deficiency. And we did see a little chemical drift on one field. Overall, the wheat was good. And then we saw the big steam engine in Dodge City, Kansas, and the largest van go in Kansas. So.
We saw that too. I'm gonna stand up here so I use the map a little better. So I rode with David today. We were on the red. We actually hit 7 fields between Goodland and Syracuse, which was half the amount of stops we made in about a third of the distance. So, so what did we see? We actually saw some, the first field, a little bit of stripe rust, and then the next couple fields was some pretty evident Russian wheat aphid. And David was actually able to find the insect itself. Was it dead? You said it was.
There's a couple live.
There was some live ones. Okay, yeah. So you were able to peel back the leaf and actually, show me the insect. Like, oh, cool. But
He may have planted those.
Which is possible. We did stop at, we did stop at David's house and had breakfast burritos, and that was pretty good. So 10 out of 10 recommended if you ever get a chance. Homemade salsa, pickled onions. So I specifically on my map have circled between Syracuse and Garden City that this is very bad. We did stop, remember that field we stopped at, we didn't measure, but the wheat was about 6 inches and was headed out completely. So, I mean, you didn't think a combine could even hit it, so maybe a lawnmower, I don't know. We did hit one field in here that had about 50% hail damage. Was that the one that was completely, ankle high water? I don't remember.
Yeah, that was. There wasn't lake in there.
My feet were wet the entire day after that. So then between Garden and probably past Dodge to Greensburg, it was mostly good fields with a little bit of disease pressure. I think we saw a little bit of rust. One field with wheat streak, and then one barley yellow door field. It wasn't there wasn't too much. We went to the the largest largest handmade well and hand dug well in the world. So that was mildly interesting. That was about it. I mean, there was nothing major. There was nothing major between Dodge City and here, so everything, unless you want to add in David, so everything was pretty good.
14 stuff.
Oh yeah, our averages, I don't have it in front of me, but I turned it in. It was, I think we had 67 average calculated. Eyeball was, we put it at like 55. It might say something different on the sheet I turned in. Our low was 41.1 and our high was 96.6. So yeah, it's like, yeah.
So where did the wheat change? Because the Southwest sounds like it's pretty bad.
Well, definitely east of Syracuse is where we, I mean, it looked really bad.
So Lincoln, about 5 miles west of Lincoln looks good. That's the field. They got 50% hail damage.
The good week starts about Highway 83, Garden City, or just a little bit west of there, but most of it is that 83 corridor east. They got earlier rain. In April, the western 6 counties, southwest 6 counties, we got no rain.
One quick note, Fort Dodge, if you don't know where that is, just east of Dodge City there. We stopped at an irrigated field, probably 70% of the head in the field looked like that. Freeze damage. So.
Yeah, we did see some freeze damage. There was a couple more fields with hail damage. I think we had one going south from Goodland and maybe, other than the one that was halfway hailed out, we may saw a couple more, some hail damage. Otherwise, just like a little bit of disease pressure. Really good soil moisture, so fun day.
Mark Nelson, Kansas Farm Bureau. I don't have a whole lot more to add. I saw the hail, and the one exception I would take is that the hand dug well is not just the largest hand dug well in Kansas. It's not just the largest hand dug well in the United States, it's the largest hand dug well in the world. So if you've never been there, you need to check it out. No. But yeah, I saw the same hail. That was my lowest 2 yields of Kearney and Finney County. A couple of fields, pretty severe. And mild disease damage, probably maybe part of this, I don't recognize everything. I felt like I saw a lot of weak streak mosaic where I saw it, but I didn't see anything that I thought, oh my God, that field's gone. One thing, typically when we're going down, especially as we start coming across Young and Red, that week's pretty far along, right? It's fruit at the latest, and a lot of times it's heading and flowering. I saw a field in Kiowa County. I mean, it was just green, it looked beautiful, but it was like jointing about this far. And I guess I throw it out there to the growers and Romeo. I mean, once we start seeing temperatures, what kind of yield potential? I mean, I think my yield potential on that thing was 37.7, but I guess my concern is that, it is so short and it's going to start to heat up. I mean, like, what is the yield potential there? I mean, I took the counts, but I'm afraid the clock's running out.
Yeah, definitely, as late as you're describing there, I would expect a very low potential because the heat's going to really shut down starch accumulation in the grain, and starch is what makes yield. And so the protein is probably going to be there, right? Because the protein is going to be, whatever is in the plant is going to be translocated to the grain, make protein, but the yield is going to come from photosynthesis during grain yield. So if it turns out really hot, shuts down photosynthesis there and shuts and brings down yield. That's the way as well. Now, there's a chance maybe some of these fields, like the one Chris was, the one that who got in trouble with the European people there. Oklahoma there, what was it? One guy got in trouble.
Where you got in trouble?
Big Rock.
Oh, big crap.
Oh, yeah, so maybe it was some sort of overcrop,
Well, it was right behind you.
Well, it was, what he did is he said that he put it in for a quick cover crop to come back, I think it was sorghum or something.
Oh, yeah, he said that cover crop wheat was real January 8th, only 59 pounds an acre, was sprayed on Monday, then terminated and get it planted in Milo. So if you all would ask permission before entering private property, maybe we would give you all this.
And this field was following cotton, okay, so it's probably keep winning with labels. Average yield over 12 stops, 45.4. So there's
Romeo, on a lot of fields in the Southwest, as I got out of the car, I would have sworn they had green bug damage. It was that depressed, it wasn't the low spot in the field, but there was that depression of the plants that were real thick. It there a lot of that out there, or was it something else that was?
We didn't necessarily too much of that. There was one field that we saw shortened, but it was just the corner. We really didn't think more that it was probably just beginnings and some application, some sort of chemical, and just much more concentrated right there. So I didn't notice that as much recut damage in the route that we did at least. Where did you see most of it?
We were on the blue in the west.
No, 160.
And you know, the leaves are torn up at the ends, you know, kind of brown, and it's very stunted. You know, to me, it just looked like, that's what I remember about green book damage, which was small, roundish patches that are short.
Yeah, we saw quite a bit of aphids, right? Some of the fields that we were coming out and back to the car, and we were bringing a lot of them with us. But not that I noticed the damages you were making there.
Okay, drivers on the green route.
So I drove part of the green route and then kind of took a detour. I made about 8 stops, saw an average of about 48, pretty similar to yesterday. I just didn't quite see the same variability. My high was 81, my low was 31, whereas yesterday I saw a few more in the 20s and then a few more in the 90s, so it was a little bit different. It also wasn't quite as wet as what I saw yesterday. Yesterday when I was walking through fields, it was almost like wading through a pool, whereas today it was still pretty wet, but it wasn't quite as wet as the other ones were. It was also quite a bit shorter. And then pretty interesting, I took a detour down onto the yellow route and went to Caldwell, which is just right inside the Kansas border on that yellow route. I went and saw a board member of ours that was doing some test plots. He had one field that actually didn't end up getting sprayed for rust and kind of got hammered by it. It was one field, there was some miscommunications and it didn't get the fungicide applied. And so they were expecting 20+% yield loss on it on what would have been a pretty good field otherwise. It was also pretty interesting. They were doing some test plots of a bunch of different varieties from Oklahoma State, Kansas State, a whole bunch of different ones. There was a beardless white, which I had never seen before. And they were doing a bunch of fertility tests. They had full strips and you could see a bunch of variability in heights and quality and how big the heads were just based on how much nitrogen and other nutrients they were putting in the soil. But that's pretty much what mine was like.
All right, guys, I'm Mike McGraw. I was with Sean today, Tim, and Julie, and we dropped down out of Colby to the lake and then pretty much headed east from there. We got in 15 stops today. We saw pretty much no disease until we got to basically Jetmore, and from then on, we saw weed streak. We saw some cracks in the ground on one field, a little bit of freeze damage, a little bit of hail, we think. Not a whole lot. And at the last couple stops, we saw some blue stems, blue leaves on the wheat, which we thought was interesting. We had an average yield of 62.4 with the lowest 31 and the highest of 108, which we were all kind of thinking a little shocked by that much, but it looked good. Eyeball average 54. This compares to the yield last year, or 2019 third, 45.1. And we think in like 4 to 6 weeks to harvest. And one final tip, if you're riding with Sean, don't lose your yardstick in the morning. You'll hear about it all day.
Brent Schaffner with HFI. Like I mentioned, obviously also still on the green route. I was with Colin. Overall, really good wheat. Did see some pretty significant hail damage around the Wichita area. It's going to impact yields, but with the amount of rain that they've gotten, which evidently is over 8 inches in the last week, we might see some rebound, so it might not be as bad as it would normally. Had a high of 77 and a low of 38, so it was a little bit more consistent than what we saw last year or yesterday. Ended up with an average of 55.25. I guess probably a little optimistic because in the west there was a lot of drought stress early and now it's flooded. So how that ends up computing
it's hard to say. I eyeballed it probably 50 average across the board. So other than that, not really a whole lot different than everyone else.
Thank you, guys. Let's go to the black route so they don't always have to finish last, and then we'll wrap up with purple.
All righty. Ernie Benton, Kansas State University. Marty and I rode together today on the black route. We rolled up 22 stops. I'm messing with you, it was only 10.
Oh.
Double digits.
That's more like Ernie.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So yesterday was a high of 12 for us. Anyway, so we in those 10 stops, we had an average calculated of 75, lowest 46, highest 99, and generally speaking, this has been shared today, Aaron said it and others have, you get back in the car, you do the calculation, and you're going like that field's probably not going to make that. And yet, it feels arbitrary to try to do things to bring the yield down. That's not what we're about. So that's what we stuck with. So on the north-south portions headed out of Colby and headed south in those western counties, minimal disease pressure in the fields that we observe. This is I'm just parroting what Marty told me to write down. Two fields with wheat streak most likely are going to lose yield by harvest time. Very little stripe rust. One field with a trace amount of leaf rust. And Marty, did I miss it?
What is?
Yeah.
One field with pretty heavy septoria.
Amy Heesh with CHS Hedging. I was actually listed as a driver, but I made Levi drive for 2 days. We were on the Blackbog. Also, we started the day at the Kansas Plunge in Grainfield. Walked into the wheat field and sunk, and we were just wet up to, well, I was wet up to my armpit. Levi's taller than me, so we were soaked already at 6:30, but our average calculated yield was 58.79. We had 10 stops. Our lowest was 20.9. Our highest was 105.1. That was on 96 coming down to Wichita.
Yeah, about halfway between here and Hutchinson.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we figured it's probably 3 to 4 weeks to harvest. Yep, most of the fields were in flowering in the flowering stage. We saw a little bit of disease as well. But I think we saw the nitrogen deficient field. There was one field that we went by that looked pretty yellow. Could almost mistake it for we'll call it a canola field, but then we saw that a couple of fields were in that Lane County also that were drought resistant fields as well. So anything else to add? Okay.
Max Slater from Ohio. I was on the black route as well, let me lower the legend. And we did 1 or 2 stops on straight down, and then we did 17 stops east to west. Over that, we've had an average calculated yield of 51, the lowest yield being 25 and the highest being 79. Generally between 5 and 7 weeks to harvest. There's a lot more in-field uniformity today than there was yesterday. So just a lot more, just more consistent within the field. But in general, there was just a lot more disease pressure, including some fields that literally had everything that we could list. So there was one that was just a smorgasbord of stripe, mosaic, rust, there was smut. When we got in the car, covered in aphids. There were weeds above the wheat itself. I think that was the last one we did. Yeah, yeah, it was really rough. So we figured maybe 30% loss on that one, but kind of a mixed bag. So some really good fields, some iffy fields, all wet whole day though. And then we stopped at the Kansas State Experiment one of the test fields, and that was really cool. So got to see some of the experiments you guys run over there. Really appreciate that. Yep.
And the purple farmers, purple rock.
All right, I'm Wayne with Anderson's grade group. We started off here, Colby came down. Our first field was our worst of the day. It was north of Oakley there. We measured that at 38 bushels an acre. Had some slight freeze damage. It was a little bit stunted as well. Kind of coming down here, saw some pretty like 60s numbers. And then once we hit Scott City and turned east, we saw some really good looking wheat, great stands, averaging probably 70 to 80 bushels an acre all the way over to Lyons. Once we kind of hit Lyons and started coming south, we saw a lot of excessive moisture in this area, some signs of nitrogen deficiency, and some leaf rust as well. Estimating probably 35 to 40 days out on harvest. Our overall average was 68 bushels an acre. But I mean, yet again, this wheat here from Scott City to Lyons looked really good today. Some good uniform stands, tall wheat.
Vance Lamb, Arden Mills. We also had the purple route. Andrew Blubaugh led the caravan today. Our average calculated yield was 58.2. That's compared to 52.5 in 2019. We did 10 stops, similar low of 30 in the west and a high of 90 in the east. We headed straight out of Scott City, straight out of Colby down to Scott City. We took a detour to Leote to visit the Hortons, tested the mud tires on our Reynolds, and then started heading east to Wichita. And as you would expect, kind of like Blaine described, our lowest yields were kind of in the west, and then started to pick up the closer we got to where we are now. Other things to note, we did, it seems like on the purple route, we did see standing water most of the day. And we did have one field of wheat streak mosaic virus that was pretty rough near Tacoma. Other than that, disease was fairly minimal. That's it.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Dave has handed out the summary sheets for today. We'll just go through those numbers real quickly. On day 2, there were 164 stops. The day 2 average was 56.7 bushels per acre. On that right-hand column, immediately to the right, not in bold print, you can see in 2019, the day 2 average was 47.6. And so this is, again, one of the highest averages we've seen at least since 2013. The day 2-day average for this tour in the little box is 57.9, and that compares to a 2-day average of 47.2 in 2019. And then we've got the Oklahoma data for you on that sheet too. So any questions about the numbers? I think if we were asked for a show of hands, some of you think that the numbers are probably a little bit high today. Is that kind of the consensus? Anybody disagree with that? So okay, one objection.
No, just a question.
Go ahead.
When's the last year of the tour that we actually calculated with this formula? I mean, the last several years, we've been using the early season.
Yeah, I mean, usually it's been split, right? In order, the first day you use the count tillers, and sometimes the second day you count heads and stuff at the end. But for the whole tour, I can't recall a time, Dave, can you? I mean,
there's no getting around the fact that the one change we made this year because of COVID was we went later.
Right.
So we're 3 months later. That pushed everybody into the what I would call the correct yield formula, the one we're using today. But there's no question that the old formula would have suppressed these numbers this early in the year. And I don't have an answer yet as to what better or worse or what we should have done different. I don't know.
When was the old formula changed?
What's that?
You said the old formula.
The early season formula is a crop model, not a yield formula. And a
crop model tells you what you can, what has happened over history to the crop with these conditions, with these tiller counts in Kansas. It tells you what has happened historically. That has never been a yield formula that's going to tell you what's going to happen this year. And so now we're in a situation where we're using the formula that to me is real, the real yield formula, which is heads times spikelets times kernels per spikelet divided by the row width times 0.48. That's the number. That's the real number. But I don't know if what going 3 weeks later, what the difference between us always using the old formula or the early season formula and now the late season formula. But I can tell you that the early season formula, if we'd used it today, would have suppressed these numbers.
So that being said, if this is a more accurate tour, when all the numbers finally shake out, will the tour be?
I'm not trying to scare anybody. In fact, I would say, I would stand by the numbers.
Right, and I agree with that. But what I'm saying is, if we're more accurate than the old formula, like previous tours were using, do you think the tour will stay in this stage of the crop?
Well, okay, so I think that's a fair thing that we need to talk about as a council. And so I'd say, number one, we're now 3 weeks later than we are historically looking at the crop. So we're now May 18th, we're normally the end of April. I personally like looking at it later, when it's headed out, when we have 2 of the 3 numbers that we need, the number of heads, the size of the heads. The only thing we still don't know is the kernels. But this is a better situation to get an accurate yield. But historically, we've always went on the end of April, and that has been the way the tour works. And I don't know, like for Mike, for example, once you bust into this middle of May, you start running into other problems like field days, and people can't come, and it's too late in the year, and the government's already come out with a number. So I don't know. I would like to take your big on show of hands. All that being said, is there a feeling we'd rather go later like now, or would we rather go earlier before the government has come out with a number? What's more important?
I got a comment. It's not quiet any longer. So I've done the tour several times. Like I said before, I've been out standing in a field many times. But anyways, back to this. On the west corridor, we did run into several fields that were, we had more in the boot than we had headed out. And I think we did 3 fields early season, and we went ahead and we did a double. We only recorded 1, but we did both the early season calculation and we did the current where we could find heads out. And was it within 2 bushel of each other?
No, it was 29.2 at the early, 31.8.
Okay, and so that we're within 5%.
Yeah, and that's always going to be the case when you're close to that kind of number. Okay. When you're at 70 bushels an acre, I guarantee you
there's a big
early
difference.
season formula is going to suppress that high.
Right. Now, the other thing I did want to say is, so we are quite a bit later this year, and yeah, I should be out planting milo, but it is too wet, so I'm okay with that. But back to the other thing is, so when we look back at previous data, I always wanted to wait until later, but if we look at historical times, earlier is probably, or we should probably stay consistent as opposed to being changed. Thank you.
Just one thing.
I'm sorry, I'm going for a
Here's the ball.
Okay, just a quick question. The data, the models come from Ag Statistics, right?
National Ag Statistics.
Okay, so it's based off of data that they use and that they collect during that last week of April, first week of May. So I mean, basically our models are better fit for that time. Do you know, did Doug make any adjustments to the fact that we're 3 weeks later? Or are we kind of using a model that is based off of historical data for the first week of May, and we're applying it to plants that are 3 weeks later.
That doesn't matter, that doesn't matter as long as you're counting
We're not
days.
really applying.
Well, but I know that gets to the.
We give it up on the formula. That formula was designed for wheat that hasn't headed. And now we've got wheat that has headed, and we switched to the late season formula. And it's more of a switch than the normal year, for sure. You know, normally, we would switch during the middle of the day today, and now we're switching from the beginning of the tour. And
But the only reason I asked the question, the observation, is what's interesting is with all of this great looking wheat, last 3 years we've seen the same thing up in North Dakota. That we've had tours, and we were always high. And the same thing, I don't know if there's any, I know we're talking two different totally different things, but it's interesting to me that we got. Huh?
we've been high.
We've been high. We've been high.
Last year, K-State, we did our own virtual tour, and we were spot on.
Well, and that was using, I'm pretty sure that was using the late season formula too, wasn't it?
I'm not talking about
Yeah.
virtual, I'm talking about.
Well, I see, no, okay, we called it, our tour was virtual broadcast, but we had hands-on or feet-on, outstanding in the field everywhere throughout the state.
But that leads to a great point about all of this, for people who are on the tour. We calculate the averages for each day based on the formula. The number that this group releases for bushels is just an educated guess. There's no calculation about it. It's an educated guess based on what we perceive we saw on the tours. If you want to use those exact numbers and apply them towards how many acres you think you're going to be. So the total number we released from this tour is nothing calculated. It's calculated in your own head, and then we average it together. So just keep that in mind.
So Brian, in North Dakota, the last 3 years, our tour has been well below what the government has said the number is. We've been low on our estimates, not high, using this late season.
But we've had much more of a difference.
Yes,
from
it has
the
been
numbers.
low, we've been low.
Good
We
dinner.
haven't been overestimating the crop using a late season formula.
My stomach's hurting.
So that's all I would say, is that we have not been late, we have not been overestimating crops because we're using this formula. But there's no question about it, this is a real difference between what we did 2 years ago and what we're doing now.
Yes, Chris.
Even a lot of our eyeballs were a lot less than what we actually estimated, but also we saw some really healthy heads, and we're using the spike clip count times 2.3. And I wonder if we'll make up some of that, because I would guess we'll have 3 and sometimes 4 versus the 2.3. So will that make a difference? We don't know at this point, but
I don't think we know. I mean, we use the 2.3 average all day, and we didn't take the time to count it. Okay.
How many people think we overestimated the fields today? How many people think we didn't overestimate the fields today? So, we'll know what it was.
So submitting your number, calculating your number, again, those of you the first time on the tour. So there's a wealth of data in that green book. So we've got the averages for the day, and you have to calculate how many acres you think that applies to in cropping district. And I think there's data in the green book that breaks down that we don't track that anymore the last couple of years. For example, Sumner County in South Central Kansas is the largest wheat producing county in the country. And remember, it's dry. I mean, there are a lot of acres there that are kind of iffy. So those are the kind of variables you take into account. But talk to someone who's been on the tour many times. Ask them for advice on how to calculate that number.
And understand, we're not going by these averages for your guess. For the real, we're David Schiff. Here's the real money, right? This is the money on the guess. And it has no merit. He doesn't have to use any of these numbers. This is the money bet where our number that we're gonna publicize is gonna be based on the average of everybody's guess for the final crop. You don't have to pay attention to any of these numbers that we use today.
we're just publicizing them and we're trying to do the right thing to give you information. But if you think we're too high or too low, put $1 on it and give me your business card. So we're not gonna publish that 56, 55, whatever our number is what we think the state average in Kansas is. What we think the state average in Kansas is gonna be based on our $1 bet that we're gonna announce tomorrow.
What was the USDA number for Kansas?
331.
48 bushels an acre is a better way to think of it, Chris.
Okay.
So the government thinks Kansas is at 48 bushels an acre.
The record bushels per acre in Kansas is 57 bushels per acre set in 2016. So that's just something to keep in back of your mind.
Is how many?
57.
And that's about where we guessed.
And that was on 8.5 million planted acres. This is 7.3 million planted acres.
Aaron, what did USDA abandon? What did they say was gonna be abandoned in their estimate?
I think it was 6.9, was the final.
Was there parts of acres?
400,000. 400,000.
Okay. That's something else to keep in mind when you make your estimates, how much things can be abandoned.
And it was a very normal number.
Usually between 6 and 8.
Okay, before we break, so a couple of things. If you're leaving tonight, raise your hand if you're not going to Manhattan tomorrow, so Dave knows.
Oh, no, I have everybody out there.
Okay, if you have